This is a work of fiction. All names, locations, organizations, and events are entirely fictional.
Title: The 0.03mm Citadel. This is the story of a quiet war waged between a small-town factory in Higashiosaka and a great power vying for global dominance. Collapse. Western Pacific, 800 meters below the surface. The latest top-secret unmanned nuclear submarine Leviathan, developed by a certain superpower, was supposed to shift the global military balance that day. But just 40 minutes after the test voyage began, something went wrong. Section 3, Abnormal vibration detected. Frequencies are not synchronizing. Impossible. Every single part was completely auto-designed by AI. The tolerance should be 0. The monitors inside the vessel turned red. The special alloy nut securing the propeller shaft had loosened and fallen off due to minute vibration resonance. A multi-trillion-yen iron behemoth was crushed by water pressure and sank into the abyss. Days later, after analyzing the recovered wreckage, a technical officer of the superpower sent an unbelievable report back home. It was manufactured exactly according to the design drawings and material specifications, a perfect copy. Yet something was decisively different from the original. Impossible to replicate. 6 months later. Iwagane Takosho, Iwagane Ironworks, a small factory tucked away in a corner of Higashiosaka. A luxury car that looked wildly out of place was parked in front of the oil-soaked, dimly lit workshop. Out stepped Koki Takagi, a Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs bureaucrat, and Smith, a technical advisor from the superpower. Smith was visibly irritated. After the Leviathan incident, they had mobilized thousands of elite engineers, run endless supercomputer simulations, and poured astronomical budgets into perfectly replicating the nut made at Iwagane Takosho. Yet no matter how many times they tried, the test pieces either fractured or loosened on the rig. Mr. Iwagane. Smith addressed the old man hunched over the lathe, Genzo Iwagane, who didn't even bother removing his grease-stained work gloves. Let me be direct. We wish to acquire your factory. The offer is 50 billion yen. However, there is one condition: we want every piece of your manufacturing data uploaded to our servers. Genzo, still gripping the lathe handwheel, replied without turning around. The data's already all public on the net. Patents expired long ago. Take whatever you want. Don't lie. Smith slammed the desk. We machined it to the exact drawings, heat-treated at the same temperatures. Yet only your nuts never suffer metal fatigue. You're hiding something. A special additive? The composition of the quenching oil? The unspoken parameters. Genzo gave a short snort and glanced at Takagi. Hey, Mr. Government Man. Is it raining outside today? Huh? Ah, yes, it's drizzling lightly. What about it? On rainy days the humidity's high, so I raise the furnace temperature by 2 degrees. But today there's a west wind, and cold air slips through the gaps in the door. So I add another 3 degrees. Genzo tapped the glowing red iron rod lightly with a hammer, then shook his head. Nah, today's steel is in a bad mood. Carbon distribution's a bit uneven. Gotta shorten the quenching time by 0.5 seconds or it won't get tough enough. Smith stood dumbfounded. What is that? That's not data. That's feeling. Exactly. Feeling. Genzo tossed the freshly machined nut to Smith. Your country uses money and sheer numbers to create perfect drawings. But iron is a living thing. Every batch is different. I read the personality of each different lump of iron through the vibration in my fingertips and the sound it makes, and I deliberately leave 0.03 millimeters of distortion. That distortion acts like a spring under extreme pressure, it bites back harder. Smith felt a chill run down his spine. What they wanted was an industrial product. What stood before them was 50 years of accumulated data inside one old man's body, plus a real-time neural network that processed it. To train an AI on that would require Genzo to live another 100 years and experience every conceivable weather condition and material variation. Human beings as a resource. I understand. Smith wiped cold sweat from his brow. 50 billion isn't enough. We want you to come. Name your annual salary. Train our successors in our country. It was effectively a declaration of the neutralization of Japan's strategic weapon. Just as Genzo seemed about to nod, Takagi, who had been silent until then, spoke in a trembling voice. Wait, please. But the voice was feeble. Takagi had realized something. When rare earth exports were halted, Japanese industry screamed in pain. Yet the old man standing here now held a component that the world's most powerful military could not make. This was no longer just a craftsman. He was a strategic resource on the level of petroleum or uranium, or even more irreplaceable. But in Takagi's mind, the choices Japan had made over the past 30 years flashed by one after another. 1990s, semiconductors. Japan once held 50% of the world market. Under the banners of cost reduction and selection and concentration, R&D budgets were slashed, factories closed, engineers poached by Korea and Taiwan. By the time anyone noticed, semiconductors had become something to buy. 2000s, LCD panels. Sharp's technology once dominated the world. Sold off factory and all because we can't win on price. The engineers were forced to watch their own know-how being used to build products that crushed Japanese companies. 2010s, solar panels. Japan once led in conversion efficiency. Withdrew because we can't compete with Chinese mass production. Researchers lost funding, labs shut down, patents sold for next to nothing. And now, Genzo Iwagane. He was about to become the next line on the ever-lengthening list of things Japan let slip away. Takagi wanted to shout. Mr. Iwagane cannot be handed over. He is Japan's national security itself. His outflow abroad is strictly prohibited by law. In exchange, the government will permanently guarantee his status and livelihood. But the words froze in his throat. Because he already knew exactly what his superiors in Kasumigaseki would say when he reported back. A new legal framework for one-town factory owner? There's no precedent. And where's the budget? The Ministry of Finance will never approve it. What happens when he dies? Who certifies the next important person? What are the criteria? Parliament will never pass such a vague system. Government intervention in a private company's decisions violates free market principles. The United States won't stay quiet. Takagi had perfectly memorized the bureaucratic list of reasons not to act that had been repeated for decades. And above all, he himself had never once visited this factory before today. He had come only because Smith asked him to accompany him. Until this morning he hadn't even known Genzo's name. Defeat. Mr. Iwagane. Takagi squeezed out the words. I now understand how important your skill is. But Genzo cut him off. It's fine, Mr. Government Man. The old man gave a tired smile. I'm already 73. No successor. My son went to university and became a salaryman. Said, I'm not gonna do that greasy job. I was planning to close the factory next year anyway. If I can do one last big job, that's good enough. He turned to Smith. About the salary, 5-year contract, 10 billion yen. But when I die, everything goes to my son. At least let him learn that Dad's skill is worth money. Smith nodded immediately. We'll prepare the contract today. Takagi could only watch the scene unfold. The empty factory. 5 years later. As promised, Genzo trained successors in the superpower's country and quietly passed away. His expertise was fully digitized and preserved as an AI training model. Iwagane Takosho in Higashiosaka had already been demolished. A convenience store now stood on the site. Around the same time, the Japanese government finally began moving toward enacting an important technology outflow prevention law. But deliberations crawled at a snail's pace, even the definition of which technologies are important remained unresolved, and the committee spun its wheels for years. Sitting at the far end of that committee table, Takagi remembered Genzo's words from that day. Iron is a living thing. A living thing, once dead, never comes back. And for the past 30 years, Japan had repeated the same mistake over and over. Technology that cannot be digitized. Experience that cannot be manualized. Intuition that cannot be taught to AI. Because they kept dismissing these things as inefficient, outdated, or not worth the cost, this was the Japan of today. From the committee room window, Tokyo's skyscrapers glittered dazzlingly. Yet at their feet, something continued to collapse silently. No, people knew, but they still could not move. Epilogue. 10 years later. The superpower's unmanned submarines cruised freely across every ocean. Incorporated into their core was the 0.03 mm distortion technique left behind by Genzo. Meanwhile, Japan's Ministry of Defense was attempting to develop a similar submarine. But every single critical component had to be imported from abroad. One day, the superpower suddenly halted parts exports to Japan. No reason was given. Only the phrase strategic decision appeared in the notice. Japan protested, but the reply was icy. We, too, cannot hand over our own strategic technologies to other countries. Please understand. They were the very words Japan had once been unable to say to Genzo. The end. A nation is an entity that correctly identifies what must be protected and possesses the will to protect it to the end. Japan repeatedly misjudged what must be protected and forgot how to hold the will. By the time it realized, almost nothing worth protecting remained.
This isn't your typical war story. No big explosions, no grand battles on a field. Instead, this is about a quiet but very high-stakes conflict, a fight over something smaller than a human hair. But this tiny detail? It would go on to decide the fate of nations. This is the story of the 0.03 millimeter castle wall. And I want you to really get this. This isn't just about making things. The story frames it as a silent war. Picture it, a tiny, unassuming workshop in East Osaka going up against the full might of a global superpower. And their battlefield? It was a single, simple piece of metal. So, what are we talking about here, stakes-wise? Well, how does several trillion yen sound? That's the price tag we're looking at, the cost of one catastrophic failure that sits right at the heart of this story. It's a number that's so big it's honestly hard to even wrap your head around. A total technological and financial disaster. And the cause of this multi-trillion yen disaster? You'd think it would be some complex system failure, right? Or maybe a sophisticated cyber attack. Nope. It was all because of a single nut. I mean, how on earth could something so small, so simple, lead to something so devastating? All right, section 1. Let's really dig into this multi-trillion yen failure. I mean, what exactly went so wrong so fast? So look at this contrast. On one side, you've got the promise, the Leviathan. We're talking a cutting-edge, AI-designed, unmanned nuclear submarine. This thing was supposed to completely change the balance of world power. Then you look at the other side, the reality, a wreck. Sitting at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, it failed just 40 minutes into its very first test voyage. The ultimate high-tech dream met an immediate, catastrophic end. And this is what made the whole thing so incredibly baffling. The superpower's own investigators were totally stumped. They were sure they had copied the Japanese nut perfectly. I mean, they used the exact same blueprint, the exact same materials, but something was critically, fundamentally different from the original. So that's the big question, right? Where did the problem come from? The data was perfect, but the result was a total failure. Well, the search for that answer is going to take us away from the clean rooms of a high-tech lab and into a small, kind of greasy workshop in Japan. And you have to appreciate the scale of this failure. We're talking about a global superpower's best minds. Thousands of brilliant engineers, supercomputers running around the clock, Basically an unlimited budget, and they threw all of that at trying to replicate one single nut, and they failed. Every single time. Okay, so this is where our main characters come in. The superpower, totally frustrated at this point, sends their top advisor, a guy named Smith, straight to the source, the Iwagane Ironworks. And it's there he meets Genzo Iwagane, this elderly craftsman who, whether he realizes it or not, is holding the key to a multi-trillion yen secret. So Smith's approach is exactly what you'd expect from a data-obsessed superpower, right? He walks in and offers 50 billion yen. Huge money. But there's one condition, and it's a big one. He wants them to upload all of their manufacturing data to their servers. See, he believes the secret is just information that can be copied, uploaded, and replicated. But here's the thing. The secret, it wasn't in a database. It wasn't something you could just upload. It was somewhere else entirely. And that brings us to the incredible revelation, the craftsman's secret. So when they talk to Genzo, he doesn't talk about code or algorithms or formulas. He talks about, well, the rain. He says, it's raining today. He talks about the wind. He even talks about the mood of the iron. He observes, he feels, he listens. And based on that, he makes these tiny, tiny adjustments that you won't find on any blueprint. You see, this isn't data. It's like a conversation he's having with the material itself. And this is it. This is the secret. It wasn't about making a perfect copy. The secret was a deliberate, almost invisible imperfection, a tiny warp, just 0.03 millimeters. This tiny flaw is what allows the nut to act like a spring when it's under immense pressure. So instead of breaking, it actually tightens its grip. It's just a beautiful, totally counterintuitive piece of engineering. There's actually a term for what Genzo has. It's called tacit knowledge. Think of it like this. There's knowing that a recipe calls for a cup of flour. That's data. But then there's knowing how to adjust that recipe on a really humid day so the dough comes out just right. That's tacit knowledge. It's the kind of expertise that lives in the hands and the mind of an expert. And you just can't write it down in a manual or upload it to a server. And at this point, the light bulb goes on for Smith. He finally gets it. He realizes he can't buy the data because the data isn't the real asset here. The man is the asset. So his whole strategy changes. He pivots and says, forget the factory. We need you. Name your price. The superpower isn't trying to buy a process anymore. They're trying to buy a person. Okay, so this is where the story gets even bigger. Because while all this is happening, a Japanese bureaucrat named Takagi is watching, and he has this horrifying realization. This isn't just some business deal anymore. Takagi sees that Genzo isn't just a skilled craftsman. He is a strategic national resource. This one man holds a technology that a global superpower, with all its money and power, cannot replicate. That makes him as valuable as an oil field or a uranium mine. In effect, he's a kind of human weapon. And you have to understand the context for Takagi's panic. He's seen this movie before. He looks at this situation and sees the next name on a long, tragic list. Japan used to dominate in semiconductors in the 90s, then LCD panels in the 2000s, then solar panels, but in every single case, they let their technological edge just slip away. To him, Genzo is just the next line item on a list of precious things about to be lost forever. So Takagi is just wanting to scream from the rooftops, "Stop! This man is a national treasure. We can't let him go." But he knows exactly what his superiors are going to say. He can already hear all the excuses that make up that bureaucratic wall. Things like, well, there's no precedent for this, or where would the budget come from? And of course, it's against free market principles. It's like the perfect checklist for why nothing can ever get done. So you have this situation. One side is absolutely desperate to get this knowledge, and the other side is completely unable or maybe unwilling to protect it. And that brings us to the inevitable conclusion of this story, the price of neglect. And, in the end, Genzo's decision is actually tragically simple. He's 73 years old. He doesn't have a successor. His own son didn't want what he called the greasy family business. He was already planning on closing the factory next year anyway. So from his perspective, the superpower's offer wasn't some grand betrayal. It was just one last job before closing up a shop that his own country didn't really seem to value anymore. And here's the devastating irony, the real kicker. 10 years go by. Now Japan decides it needs to build its own advanced submarine. But the one guy who knew how to make the most critical component, he's gone. His knowledge now belongs to that other superpower. So what do? They have to go cap in hand to the very same superpower they sold that knowledge to and try to buy it back. And the superpower's response? Well, it's the final crushing blow. They refuse to sell. They say, we cannot give our nation's strategic technology to other countries. Please understand. They use the exact same logic that Japan failed to use a decade earlier to protect its own asset. The circle is now tragically complete. So think about it. Genzo's secret was that tiny 0.03 millimeter imperfection, something that our modern obsession with data-driven perfection would have smoothed out, would have corrected. It makes you wonder, right? In our endless chase for efficiency and perfect data, what other beautiful imperfections, what other forms of human genius are we choosing to lose along the way?
Imagine the ultimate machine, a true Leviathan of the deep. We're talking about an unmanned nuclear submarine operating all on its own, 800 meters beneath the surface of the West Pacific.
This is the absolute pinnacle of military tech for a global superpower. Trillions of yen, poured into AI design for every single part.
Every bolt, every plate of armor, every single circuit designed to what they thought was mathematical perfection.
It sounds unstoppable, doesn't it? The kind of thing that just changes the global balance of power overnight. It's the future of warfare. Clean, precise, no humans involved.
You'd think so. But in the narrative case study we're covering today, that invincibility has a shelf life of exactly 40 minutes.
40 minutes? That's not a great return on investment.
No, not at all. 40 minutes into its first big test run, the hull just implodes. The sub is crushed instantly. And the cause wasn't a torpedo or some kind of hacker attack.
So what was it?
It was a single metal nut on a screw shaft that loosened.
A nut. The simplest, most basic component on the entire vessel.
The simplest part. And get this is the real kicker and the reason we're doing this deep dive. That nut was a perfect copy. It was made exactly according to the digital design data down to the last molecule. And yet, it failed where a handmade original succeeded.
Wow. That's a fantastic hook. It immediately sets up this tension between, the digital world where everything is perfect and the physical world, which is messy.
Exactly. Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're unpacking a really gripping story called 0.03 millimeter castle wall, or 0.03 Mirinoji Keiki. It's a story about the collision between perfect data and, well, imperfect human intuition.
It's also a pretty stark warning about what we consider a strategic resource. We always think of oil or lithium or uranium, but this story makes the case that human experience, that unquantifiable knack, is maybe the most critical resource of all.
And one we're systematically throwing away because you can't measure it in a spreadsheet. So let's get into the incident itself. The Leviathan is down. The engineers back at headquarters are just staring at their screens. It's an unmanned vessel, so the AI is running everything. And then suddenly, the third compartment starts vibrating.
Right. They're picking up a frequency mismatch. And you have to put yourself in their shoes. They're shouting, we made every part with fully automated AI. The error margin should be 0.
The error margin should be 0. That's the ultimate hubris, isn't it?
It is. Because the ocean doesn't care about your math. That special alloy nut holding the screw shaft, it starts to undergo resonance.
Could you just quickly explain resonance for our listeners?
Sure. Think of an opera singer breaking a wine glass. If the vibration from the sub's engine matches the natural frequency of that nut, the energy just builds and builds until the nut physically shakes its...
Back wobbles, the seal breaks, and the water pressure at 800 meters does the rest. The sub is gone.
But the real mystery starts when they recover the debris. The technical officers, they analyze that one failed nut. They run every test imaginable. They confirm it's a perfect clone. It matches the blueprints, the composition tables, everything.
So if you're the engineer, you're thinking, okay, if the part is perfect, the design must be wrong.
That's the only logical conclusion. But then they check the records. The original prototype, which used a nut from some small Japanese supplier, it worked flawlessly. Never loosened.
So you have this paradox. The perfect copy fails. The imperfect original works.
And the final report has this chilling line. It says, It was identical to the design, but decisively different from the original.
Decisively different. That line takes us 6 months forward to Higashiosaka. For anyone who doesn't know, this is a legendary industrial city in Japan. Just a hive of small factories.
It's a great setting. The source paints this picture of Iwagane Ironworks. It's dirty, smells like cutting oil and steel dust, and pulling up to this place is a sleek black luxury car.
A total clash of worlds. Who's in the car?
2 men. First, there's Smith, the technical advisor from the superpower that lost the sub. He's high-tech, impatient, probably arrogant.
And the other guy?
That's Takagi, a bureaucrat from the Japanese Foreign Ministry. He's nervous, sweating, completely out of his element.
Smith must be desperate to go there himself.
Oh, he's furious. After the accident, they mobilized thousands of engineers, used supercomputers for endless simulations. They spent a fortune trying to just replicate this one nut.
And every single time, their perfect copies either broke or loosened in the tests.
Every single time. So they walk in, and there's the owner, Genzo. He's this older guy, bent over a lathe, just tinkering. He does not look like he holds the key to a nation's defense program.
Smith doesn't waste any time. Pulls out a checkbook. 50 billion yen.
Which is a staggering amount of money. I mean, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. For a small factory owner, that's life-changing.
But Smith doesn't want to buy the factory itself, right?
No, he wants the data. He thinks there's a file, a spreadsheet, some secret setting they missed. He wants Genzo to upload everything he knows so they can copy it.
And Genzo's reaction is just priceless.
Yeah.
He doesn't even stop what he's doing. He just says, the data. It's all online. Patent's expired. Take it.
This just drives Smith crazy. He slams the desk and starts shouting, "We cut it exactly to the drawings. We use the same heat treatment, but your nuts don't get metal fatigue. You're hiding something."
He's looking for a secret sauce. A special chemical. A magic ingredient.
But the secret isn't in the chemicals. Genzo finally stops the machine. He looks over at Takagi, the bureaucrat, and asks him a question that seems totally out of left field. He asks, "Is it raining outside?"
Takagi is just confused, but he says, yeah, it's drizzling.
And Genzo explains. He says, "On rainy days, the humidity is high, so I raise the furnace temperature by 2 degrees.
2 degrees, that seems like nothing.
To us, yeah, but not to the iron. And he doesn't stop there. He says he feels a west wind coming through the cracks in the old factory doors. That cools the material faster. So he adds another degree. We're up to +3.
Okay, this is getting interesting.
And then he hits the metal with a hammer clang, and he shakes his head. He says, "Today's iron is in a bad mood."
In a bad mood? What does that even mean?
He's listening to the pitch of the ring. He can just sense that the carbon distribution is a little uneven. So he adjusts the quenching time, the rapid cooling, by just half a second to make sure the metal keeps its stickiness.
This is wild. He's adjusting for humidity, wind, drafts in an old building, and the microscopic mood of the raw material.
Exactly. And that is why the AI failed. No AI was ever programmed to ask, is there a draft coming through the door of this specific factory on a Tuesday afternoon? The AI assumes a sterile, constant world. Genzo knows the world is alive.
Smith calls this intuition and just dismisses it. He wants science, but Genzo says iron is a living thing. The AI wants a perfect geometric shape. But Genzo, he uses all his senses to intentionally leave a 0.03 millimeter distortion.
And there it is, the title of the story, the 0.03 millimeter paradox.
But help me understand that. Shouldn't a part be perfectly round? Why would you want a distortion?
In a static world, yeah, you want a perfect circle. But deep under the ocean, with that pressure and vibration, a perfectly round nut is too rigid, it slips. Genzo explains that this tiny distortion he creates, it acts like a spring.
A spring.
Right. When that intense pressure hits, the distortion allows the nut to flex just slightly and bite into the bolt instead of loosening. It actually uses the pressure to lock itself in place.
So the imperfection is the functionality.
Yeah.
The AI couldn't design it because it's programmed to eliminate errors, not use them.
Precisely. And that's the moment Smith knows he's lost. He realizes he isn't looking at a factory worker. He's looking at a biological neural network with 50 years of training data. You can't upload that to a server.
The human variable isn't a bug. It's the feature. So Smith changes tactics. If you can't buy the data, you'll buy the human. He tells Genzo, name your price, come to our country, train our successors.
And this is where the story pivots from a tech mystery to a geopolitical tragedy. This is when the bureaucrat, Takagi, finally wakes up.
Right, Takagi's just been a bystander until now, but he suddenly gets it. This isn't a job offer. This is the surrender of a strategic weapon.
He realizes this one old man is as valuable as a rare earth mine. He is the choke point for global military dominance, and Takagi wants to just scream, "Wait! Stop! He's a national treasure!"
But he doesn't. He freezes. Why?
Because of the context. The source really dives into Takagi's inner monologue here, and it's just heartbreaking. He starts thinking about the last 30 years of Japan's industrial history.
It's just a long list of losses.
Yeah.
The semiconductors in the 90s.
Exactly. Japan had 50% of the global market. They were kings. But then came the policies of cost-cutting and efficiency. Research budgets were slashed.
And the talent, the engineers.
They were treated like an overhead cost, so they got handhunted by Korea and Taiwan. And suddenly, Japan was buying the chips it used to invent.
And then in the 2000s, LCD panels.
Same story. Sharp's tech was the best in the world, but they couldn't win a price war. The factories were sold off. The engineers ended up working for the foreign companies that put their old employers out of business.
Solar panels in the 2010s. It's the same pattern over and over. Japan innovates, but then loses to mass production. Takagi sees Genzo as just the next name on that list.
He knows if he goes back to his bosses and says, "We need to protect this one old man in a rusty factory," they'll just laugh at him.
They'd ask for the ROI.
Exactly. Where's the budget? There's no precedent. How do we even define intuition in a legal document? It violates free market principles. Takagi knows the bureaucracy is just paralyzed by its own rules.
It's so frustrating. The solution is right there, but the system is designed to reject it. Takagi even admits to himself he'd never even been to the factory before that day.
That's the killer detail. The government didn't know Genzo's value until a foreign power put a price tag on him. It shows this massive disconnect between the policymakers and the people actually making things.
So Takagi stays silent, and Genzo accepts the deal. 100 billion yen over 5 years.
And you have to sympathize with Genzo, too. He's 73. He isn't selling out because he's greedy. He has no heir. His son is a salaryman who hates the smell of oil and thinks the factory is an embarrassment.
The son represents that shift away from manufacturing.
Yeah, and Genzo says something really poignant. He says, "I want to leave this money to my son to prove that technological skill translates to money."
Well, that's a heavy line. He feels he has to sell his entire life's work just to prove its value in the only language his son, and maybe society, understands: cash.
So the deal is signed. Fast forward 5 years. Genzo goes abroad, he trains their engineers, and then he passes away. The superpower. They actually managed to convert his intuition into a sophisticated AI learning model. They finally digitized him.
And back in Higashiosaka, the factory.
Iwagane Ironworks is demolished. It's a convenience store now.
A convenience store. You can buy a sandwich where they used to build the only part that could save a nuclear sub. That's symbolic.
It is. Meanwhile, the Japanese government tries to pass a Critical Technology Protection Act, but it stalls in committee for years. They just argue over definitions. They prove the story's point. They're unable to act until it's far too late.
So now we jump forward again, 10 years later. What does the world look like?
The geopolitical map has changed. That superpower submarines, now with the .03 millimeter distortion tech, they dominate the oceans. They're undetectable, they're durable, they're just better.
And Japan.
Japan realizes it's fallen behind. They try to build a similar submarine. They have the budget now, they have the will, but they can't manufacture the parts. The capability is gone. It turned into a convenience store.
So they have to try and import the parts from the superpower.
They try, they send a formal request, and the superpower refuses. The reason they give is the ultimate irony. They say, "We cannot hand over our country's strategic technology to others."
Oof. That hurts. They use the exact logic, the exact words that Japan failed to use a decade earlier.
It's a complete reversal. The source says Japan treated these unquantifiable human skills intuition experience as inefficient and obsolete. They cut them because they didn't look good on a quarterly report, thinking they could just buy it all back later.
But you can't. That knowledge evaporates.
Right. Takagi reflects on this at the end. He thinks about Genzo's words. Iron is a living thing. Living things die. Once that lineage of skill is broken, you can't just reboot it.
It's a tragedy of valuation. They knew the price of the factory, but they didn't know the value of the skill inside it. The .03 millimeter distortion wasn't a flaw, it was the castle wall, and they sold it brick by brick.
It forces you to ask what efficiency really means. If efficiency means stripping away all the human nuance, you might end up with a system that's perfectly efficient, but also perfectly fragile.
That's a powerful takeaway. This story isn't anti-AI. It's saying that AI without the grounding of physical human reality is actually dangerous.
And it's saying that a nation or a company has to know what its core is. What is the one thing you can't sell? If you treat everything as a commodity, You eventually find yourself empty-handed, staring at a convenience store where your future used to be.
The story ends with that somber thought that a nation is defined by the will to identify what must be protected.
And in the story, they lost that will. They saw a dirty factory and an old man, and they couldn't see the strategic asset until it was walking out the door.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? As you go about your day, what are the 0.03 millimeter details in your own life or your industry that are being overlooked because they can't be measured?
What are the things that, if we lose them, can never be bought back? That's the real question. Are we protecting our own castle walls, or are we selling them off for a quick profit?
And that is the question we'll leave you with today. A massive thank you to the author of 0.03 millimeter Castle Wall for this incredible story. And thank you, our listeners, for diving deep with us.
Keep questioning the data.
See you next time.